Ever wondered what family dinners looked like in the 1970s from coast to coast? It was a time when salad dressing had more colors than your TV. Here are the go-to dinners that warmed 70s homes. Chicken and dumplings originated outside of Alabama, but found a very loving home in the state where it was popularly served. Chinese Americans' restaurants would serve the dish as an affordable dinner for people. In the 1970s, Alabama had dumpling joints that would specifically have chicken and dumplings as a bestseller. Salmon bakes in Alaska go much further back than you would imagine. Introduced in the 1800s, commercial restaurants only started to serve salmon bakes during the 1970s. Chinook salmon was one of the most widely caught fish in Alaska, and so locals created multiple dishes using it. Chimichangas are a deep-fried burrito with lots of peppers to add a pretty heavy kick depending on the sauce. Available easily in most states nowadays, chimichanga actually had their roots in Arizona. Macayo's Mexican Kitchen claims they put chimichangas on their menus first in the 1970s. Since then, the dish has ruled over Arizona as a good dinner food that can be served and enjoyed. Fried catfish was a no-brainer for Arkansas because the state is quite literally flooded with catfish. Readily available fish and locals who love fried food led to the creation of fried catfish. A rather interesting way to cook catfish, fried catfish reached the peak of its popularity in the 70s, becoming common at most family dinner tables. Talking about fried food, chicken cacciatore in California is chicken fried in olive oil and then simmered in a sauce of white wine, tomatoes, and herbs. Italian-American restaurants in the state absolutely love having this as either a main course accompanied with garlic bread. The balanced meal of bread, chicken, and tomato soup made for a perfect dinner spread. Meatier dinners were the best option in the 70s as bison steak became popular in Colorado. Bison was one of the most widely hunted animals in the state, with locals having a deep love for the meat. Steaks and American dinners complete each other, so it is no wonder that fresh bison steak with mashed potatoes and asparagus was a fan favorite. Seafood was a popular protein choice, as clam bakes were a go-to dinner food in Connecticut. You could find a good clam bake plate for dinner anywhere from homes to restaurants, diners, and even pubs. Clams were a classic seafood in Connecticut because they were harvested and locally produced. Delaware was also serving seafood dinners as the blue crab boil was a sought-after dinner. Famously covered in Old Bay seasoning, the blue crab boil came with rosemary, sage, pepper, and of course, the freshest crabs in Delaware. People would enjoy corn on the cob, potato wedges, and an assortment of grilled vegetables with the boil. Stone crab claws were also just as special in the East Coast and Florida. Eating stone crab claws was an incredible experience. People would either go fishing on their own during harvest time to find the crabs or watch seafood restaurants bring out fresh crabs. The crab would absorb a lot of flavors and could be cooked in just about any method a person preferred. Classic American dinners often include stews, and Brunswick stew from Georgia was especially popular in the 1970s. In terms of recipe, the stew had many variations from pulled pork to beef or chicken being used along with braised vegetables and Worcestershire sauce. Due to each home customizing the stew, it was bound to be a great hearty dinner. Now, this might be different from other delicious-sounding dishes that we have talked about, but Kalua pig and tails were quite the dinner in Hawaii. Kalua pig and tails was a slow-cooked pork dish that was prepared in an underground oven that locals call imu. Kalua pig is actually deeply embedded in Hawaiian cuisine and culture, as it is served at local feasts and could easily feed dozens of people. Coming back to more appealing dishes like the pot roast. The dish was first seen during the Great Depression when economic times were rough. Pot roast made a comeback in the 70s when Idaho took the basic recipe and added proteins like beef or chicken to create a delicious roast. This made for a perfect dinner as it was filling and would often be cooked in a higher quantity. Deep dish pizza might be something you associate with Chicago or the Bronx, but it is actually extremely popular in Illinois too, particularly tomato-based pizzas with pepperoni that were served in Illinois. This dinner special had Italian sausages and a thin layered crust that every person loved. On days when people did not want to cook, the deep dish pizza became a great dinner to have. Surprisingly, Indiana preferred their dinners to be crispy fried chicken that was usually served with mashed potatoes and gravy. Soul food was becoming popular in the States, and Indiana took to adopting fried chicken and gravy as part of their staple dinner choices. Popular with working young adults, this dinner offered a good balance of nutrients and protein, provided it wasn't eaten daily. Grilled pork chops were also a fan favorite in Iowa. In the 70s, many restaurants added pork chops to their menu as specials. So many restaurants took this step that people in Iowa started testing each restaurant to see which was selling the best pork chop. This definitely boosted the dinner's popularity amongst locals, as it was both delicious and fun to eat. How can we talk about popular dinners and not discuss barbecue ribs in Kansas? The locals loved barbecue so much they created their own Kansas-style barbecue that entailed pork ribs grilled slowly in a spice rub. Pair that with a sweet but tangy sauce, and you have a knockout dinner that everyone would enjoy after a long day at work. Burgoo stew in Kentucky was really one of those wild card dishes. Sometimes you would get a heavenly tasting savory mix of vegetables and meat, but sometimes you would get a questionable lineup of flavors. This was because you could throw in just about any ingredient in the stew. Kentucky Darbies loved having it as dinner on special occasions, though. Jambalaya is one of the most popular dishes in Louisiana, and particularly in New Orleans. As confusing as the name sounds, the dish makes for one flavorful dinner. Jambalaya typically has chicken or sausage, but it may also include both meats along with seafood. New Orleans had many variations of jambalaya as it became a popular takeout food option in the 70s. It seemed that seafood options were popular that year, as lobster dinner was a regular dinner in Maine. The dish got so popular that Food magazine named it the #1 dinner in Maine. We can imagine how good the dish was, as fresh lobsters caught in Maine and served with potatoes, peppers, and a buttery sauce sounds like a heavenly dinner. Similarly, crab cakes in Maryland were one of the most famous dinners in the state. When the cakes were first introduced, they were categorized as an appetizer. People loved the recipe so much that they would order multiple plates and just eat crab cakes for dinner. This made the dinner a best-selling food at every restaurant that served the Maryland crab cakes. New England boiled dinner, getting its namesake from elsewhere, was a beloved dish in Massachusetts. Americans started having their own takes on the typical New England meal by adding fresh beef briskets along with potatoes and cabbage in a stew pot. Often paired with rice, the stew was a perfect Friday dinner. Pasties were the perfect snack in Michigan that turned into a common dinner item. When you came back home from a long day at work and were too tired to make dinner, you would eat pasties. A patty filled with ground beef and vegetables was the perfect carby dinner you would need after a tiring day. Tater tot hot dish involves some of America's iconic foods. If you wanted a casserole for dinner, then this ground beef and tater tots casserole was the go-to food. Including tater tots initially raised some eyebrows, but eventually, locals in Minnesota fell in love with the dish. Fusion food like tater tot hot dish was definitely a trend in the 70s. Shrimp and grits used to be something that fishermen ate with their families on a low budget, but since then it has undergone significant development. The 1970s saw shrimp and grits turn from a breakfast food to a dinner must-have. Typically, it would be creamy shrimp served under grits, but lots of restaurants would add cheese, sausages, or bacon as well to make the dish more filling. St. Louis-style pork ribs were incredibly attractive in Missouri, especially as a way for steakhouses to prove their skill. Maybe because this involved trimming the meat until only the best parts were left. Special dry rubs and sauces made for an extremely smoky taste that was the rib of every meat lover's eye back in the day. Coming back to the stew dinners that America loved, elk stew was a nutritious and heartwarming stew that was popular down in Montana for its savory notes. Elk stew can be made with anything provided you are not missing the elk itself. This flavorful stew, made with root vegetables like potatoes, chilies, and mushrooms, was a staple in many households. Beef stroganoff is just as good as it sounds, and it was enough of a hit in Nebraska for almost every steakhouse to start serving it. Creamy sauces topped on egg noodles with sliced, perfectly tender beef resulted in a flavor that the state of Nebraska just could not refuse. Beef stroganoff was most popular in the 70s, and for good reason, even if it is harder to find now. Prime ribs are an annual tradition down in Nevada. Smoked and glazed ribs served with an assortment of sides like potatoes, this dish was a dinner table special. Many steakhouses across Nevada feature prime ribs on the menu as a special, and they were especially popular in the 70s because chefs had started to add their own variations to the dish. Apple cider pork chops that were glazed with the sauce took over New Hampshire in 1975, but the seeds had been sown a while ago. Together with some minced garlic, this applesauce pork chop combo took New Hampshire by storm. Famous, tasty, and not ready to give up its spot, apple cider pork chops would stay throughout the 70s as a staple dinner food. Now, one thing this list was missing was pasta. New Jersey fixes that by eating stuffed shells for dinner. This meal would be a classic of New Jersey shores and Italian American restaurants. Ricotta cheese and a marinara sauce filling inside pasta shells that are then baked was a very new and trendy food back in its time. It's no surprise that the green chili stew was New Mexico's favorite dinner. Known as the green chili capital, this spicy stew filled with green chilies took the state by storm. The sudden boost in popularity could be justified by the fact that in the 1970s, the state of New Mexico actively promoted green chilies as a local delicacy to improve local sales of chilies. Not as spicy as the steak Diane served in New York. Sometimes flambéed and sometimes cooked, served with seasoned pan juices, the dish always came with Worcestershire sauce. Steaks were a common dinner option in the 70s, and locals were happy to see newer steak dishes like Steak Diane being served. Pulled pork barbecue might have its origins in the South, but for any respectable barbecue done in North Carolina, it is a sure-fire option. Pulled pork barbecue usually consists of a slow-smoked pork that is served alongside crunchy cornbread and coleslaw with tangy sauces. Knoofle soup might have German or Norwegian roots, but the North Dakota version of it has always been a hit. Smoked meat, root vegetables, and dumplings with cream was a volatile mix of flavors that ticked most boxes. Kids are never fond of soups, no matter what, but this was a great way for families to work some nutrition in the diet through an enjoyable dinner. Chicken paprikash is simpler than it is enjoyable, consisting of just braised chicken pieces tossed in a sauce made from chicken stock and vegetables. Interestingly, Hungarian paprika was somewhat of a secret ingredient. Chicken paprikash used to give it a distinct flavor. Ohio would popularize the dish in the 60s, but it would not be until the late 70s that it really took off across restaurant chains. Unique steaks made a comeback with chicken fried steaks in Oklahoma, which became popular because they deviated from traditional steak recipes. Chicken fried steak was just breaded chicken fillets that were fried then served with potatoes, but they hit every sweet spot in your body. People could not afford fancy beef and chicken was cheap, so this new form of steak was welcomed with open arms onto dinner tables. Salmon was also welcomed with open arms as cedar-planked salmon was a local delicacy in Oregon. Locals from Oregon submerged cedar planks for around 2 to 3 hours in water and then cooked salmon on it, giving the dish an intense flavor. That paired with lemon juice and garlic would captivate the taste buds of Oregon throughout the 70s. Pot roasts in Pennsylvania are a match made in Heaven's Kitchen. Slow-roasted pork stewed and cooked in a pot roast with vegetables added this perfectly caramelized flavor. Tougher cuts of meat would be used, but you knew you had it right when the meat was just falling off the bone. Rhode Island has always loved its seafood, and stuffed quahogs were a popular dinner in the 70s. Quahog clams that would be filled with bread, chorizo, and then more clams. Rhode Islanders affectionately refer to them as chowder clams. The dish itself was a little on the pricier side, so it was not the most popular dinner, but it was definitely sought after. Frogmore stew in South Carolina was the ultimate one-pot dinner. Preparation-wise, all you had to do was throw shrimps, red potatoes, and sausages into one pot with lots of seasoning and vegetables. Boiling these items together and serving Frogmore stew on dinner tables was like serving the best dish in town. As for the taste? Well, it is a given that this mess of seafood and sausages tasted incredible. Buffalo burgers in South Dakota are a pairing only outdone in age by cheeseburgers and American fast food. made from lean buffalo meat with classic toppings like mushrooms, olives, and all kinds of sauces, this was a common sight at any respectable burger joint in Dakota. Even new joints that were just starting out would serve buffalo burgers to draw in customers. Country ham is something that Tennessee residents swear derives its flavor from the curing process. Listening to them is common sense, though, considering how long the state has been dealing with ham. One of the most popular places to get country ham is Tennessee, and not only can you find canned ham dinners, but also proper meals served in popular high-end restaurants. Chili should be no stranger to anyone who knows American cuisine, especially not to people who know how much Texans love their spice. A traditional spicy beef chili dinner would be served with fried onions, roasted vegetables, and garlic. Interestingly, it would only be served during dinner time at restaurants, as chefs believed chili should be the last meal of your day. Funeral potatoes have a much more depressing name than what they actually are, which is just a cheesy casserole. These potatoes were served at family gatherings or friends having get-togethers. The cheesy potatoes would be the first dish to get finished up at any dinner gathering. Maple glazed ham might get you thinking, what's so special about Vermont's ham? The question is not about the ham, but the syrup. Sugar maple, you see, tends to adore sweet soil, which is in abundance in Vermont. So maple syrup from there is a league on its own. Pair that with cured ham, and you can figure out why this dish was an iconic choice for dinner at diners and restaurants. Another well-known type of ham is Smithfield ham, which comes from peanut-fed hogs commonly raised in Virginia. Smoked or cured ham can be enjoyed any way, but in the 70s, Virginia would eat smoked ham with a mess of vegetables. Typically, geoduck would weigh between 2 to 3 pounds, so the dish was shared amongst families and took center stage during communal dinners. Talking about geoduck chowder comes from a long-standing tradition that places this meat on a pedestal in Washington. Geoduck chowder would take your taste buds on a roller coaster because it was crunchy, sweet, soft, and smooth. The savory and tangy taste was the perfect middle ground for people who wanted a balanced meal for dinner. Venison stew would typically be made with vegetables like a hearty helping of potatoes and asparagus or collard greens. Venison, in general, is one of the most prized meats in the USA, especially for its tenderness, and West Virginia is no exception. Wisconsin leans towards less unique proteins like fish. The beer-battered fish fry was a flaky cod that would typically come encased in a crispy but light beer batter served with tartar sauce. Long John Silver's and other popular restaurants would go on to serve this meal. Lately, shepherd's pie was an American classic, especially in Wyoming. Minced meat beneath baked mashed potato was something people from Wyoming can either fondly remember or still eat to this day. Famous restaurants across the state in the 1970s would sell shepherd's pie, especially on Friday or church days. That wraps up all 50 dinners. The table is filled with many dishes, but which state's delicacy did you like the most? Make sure to like and subscribe for more tasty lists.